Okay, we're going to get started here. So you can find a chair. And this section we're going to talk about the Colorado homeschool law. And of course I need to tell you at the beginning of this presentation that I am not a lawyer and that this presentation is for informational purposes only, and so that nothing I say should be construed as legal advice, okay? But at Christian Home Educators of Colorado, we do encourage people to homeschool legally in the state of Colorado. We think that reflects well on homeschoolers when they follow the law, and so we want to help you to be able to do that in this session here. But I do want to just say briefly, as I said earlier, that probably one of the number one threats to homeschooling today is different organizations that are seeking higher regulation of homeschooling. And it's sort of a backdoor threat to homeschooling, in that they usually say, oh, well, we're for homeschooling. We just think there should be more regulation. And if you really pin them down, they'll say, yeah, there's actually no state, although homeschooling is legal in all 50 states, there's no state that we think is highly regulated enough. So they're always wanting more regulation, right? The more regulation, the harder it is to do it, and therefore the less people, especially new homeschoolers, will be inclined to do it. But here's a little map of basically regulation across all the 50 states that HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, puts out. And they've kind of color-coded it by level of regulation. And of course the green is like almost basically no regulation if you're from Texas. They like their freedom down there. The red is high regulation, states like New York and Pennsylvania. How California was a yellow, I'm not quite sure, but they actually are a lower regulated state. Colorado is orange, so we'd be considered moderate level of regulation. So there are some rules and some things that you got to do here. But we're here to help make that process smooth and easy for you. But one of the things I want to say is that studies have shown that the comparison of academic performance of homeschooled students in highly regulated states compared to no regulation states shows that there's zero difference in their performance. In other words, the whole argument that we need to, regulate homeschooling so that students will be able to get a better education, be able to perform better, that hasn't had any effect. Regulation hasn't had any effect, measurable effect on the performance of homeschoolers, okay? So at Christian Home Educators of Colorado, we're always for more freedom, always for less regulation, okay? What we're going to do is talk about basically actually in Colorado, there's three primary ways that you can homeschool legally. Basically three different legal options, and you pick one of them, right? You don't mix any of these. So there's three different exceptions or exemptions from compulsory school attendance. So compulsory school attendance is sort of the baseline starting point. Here in Colorado, any child who is 6 by August 1st, until the child reaches and is under the age of 17, falls under compulsory school attendance law, means they're required to go to school, unless they qualify under one of these exceptions or exemptions. And there's basically three exceptions that allow you to keep your children at home and home educate them. Okay, and we're going to talk about all three of them and spend most of the time on the first one, which is called the homeschool exemption, or we call it the homeschool law. And basically the law talks about a home-based education program. And there's a certain CRS, the Colorado Revised Statutes, that outlines and describes the requirements of a home-based education program. So that's one legal path for homeschooling in Colorado. The second exception is for private school students, okay? If you decide to send your child to a private school instead of a public school, you are exempted from compulsory school attendance as far as public school is concerned. Well, back in the homeschooling was never illegal in Colorado, although at one time it was considered to be one of the top 10 most dangerous states in which to homeschool. So we've come a long ways in Colorado on homeschooling. But back in the day, there was a time when basically you had to have the school district approve your curriculum, and it was very restrictive, and it was very dependent on the district that you were in and the school that you were getting approval from. And in that environment where some school districts were just categorically sort of denying any curriculum, even though it wasn't technically illegal, homeschool families in the 70s and 80s were looking for an alternative to how they could homeschool without having to go through this approval process. And so some of them began to enroll in private schools who would allow them to keep their kids at home and basically instruct the kids at home and follow the policies of the private school. Well, somewhere in the 80s, when the education department found out about it, they were like, well, no, that doesn't work. They're homeschooling, and they can't do that. And so there was actually a court case back in the 80s, and basically the court decided actually they could do that. And as long as the families met the criteria of the private school, that they could do that. So that's where in Colorado there started to be the private umbrella school option for homeschool families. So today we'll talk a little bit about the Czech Independent School, which is a private school for homeschool families that acts as an umbrella. So there's slightly different requirements if you go that route. Okay, basically your children are technically private school students rather than homeschool students in the eyes of the law, and you have to follow the requirements of the private school. And there's a separate law, separate CRS that governs private schools, which is different than the CRS that talks about a home-based education program, okay? So that's exemption number 2. And then number 3, the law basically allows that if a parent, that a child can be taught at home by someone who has a valid teaching certificate, a current teaching certificate. And so that's another way. If there's any certified teachers here, anybody? Right there. So basically, you would be allowed to keep your children at home, and you'd be exempt from compulsory school attendance, and you wouldn't actually have to follow either of the requirements of these first 2 things. So there are some parents, homeschool parents, who actually keep up their teaching certificate just for this purpose, so that they can homeschool with, and actually there's no requirements for parents that do that. You don't have to notify anybody. There's no specific regulation on records or anything that you have to do. The logic is because you're a trained professional, you know what to do. And so that they haven't outlined anything that you have to do. So and actually you can get continuing education credits by attending our annual Rocky Mountain Homeschool Conference in June. We actually have a continuing education forum for parents that keep up their teaching credential for this purpose. Okay, so that's an overview of the 3 options, and as I said, we're going to spend most of our time this morning on exemption number 1. So if you see on the slide, I kind of have the exception or exemption that we're on down listed in the corner. Okay, so there's the CRS number. There's actually a copy of the actual text of the CRS in your, I think it's on a green sheet maybe, or in your booklet. I would encourage you actually to sometime read that. It's not super long. Maybe some light, a Friday night reading or something, crack open the CRS and curl up on the couch and see what the law says. But I'll give you the overview of that. But just it's good to know it, and don't assume that if you are pulling your kids out of school and you call the school district and ask them a question, that they actually know exactly what the law is. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to try to intentionally mislead you, but just recently, a letter was sent out to homeschool families in Aurora, and we heard about other places in the state, saying, here's, you now need to use an online form. You must use our online form to submit your notice of intent, and of course, their online form that they said you must use had required information that you're not required to give by law. And it said a bunch of other things that weren't actually true about the homeschool law. This was from the Aurora School District to homeschool families in the Aurora area. So just know the law, and if you have questions and you get a letter and you're like, that doesn't quite seem right, call the check office. We can kind of let you know what's right. So the definition of this CRS talks about a home-based education program that your family establishes. And the definition of a home-based education program is a sequential program of instruction for the education of a child which takes place in a home. And so a couple key terms there: sequential, which is basically a planned program developing in difficulty. So basically, if you decide to go with a certain curriculum, which many families do, obviously that's sequential progression is built right into that. Where does it take place? It takes place in the home, and who provides it? The law says that the program needs to be provided by the parent, guardian, or adult relative designated by the parent. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but the intent of the law is that it's one of the adults within the family, okay, that's providing the program. So essentially, the idea here is really not that you're sending your child down the street to the tutor down the street to be educated by them in their house. That's not exactly in the scope of the law here. Okay, those are a few definitions from the law. We're going to talk about contact hours and the subjects that you're required to teach, and the notification process and records, okay, that you're required to take. And all of these slides, I think, also are in your book. So this is going to be a little more interactive. So if I say something, you've got a question, feel free to pop up your hand, and I'll try to just either answer the question or I'll say, we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is contact hours, which is really like how much school the law requires you to do. And the minimum requirement is 172 days, averaging 4 hours per day. Okay? So you just got to make sure you do at least 172 days of school, and that within those 172 days, that those days average 4 hours of school per day. That's the contact hour requirement. And so what's an instructional contact hour? It's just a planned part of the sequential program. Now, in your planning, make sure that you plan in plenty of flexibility, that you plan in that, trips to the zoo are part of your planned program, that you plan in that, days that you're doing PE, with other homeschool families at the park as part of your, is part of that. So this isn't to say that, the 4 hours is only the time that you're doing curriculum at your table. That's not what I'm saying. Yes?
So if you spend 4 hours per week, does that count as your 4 hours per day?
Yeah, that would. That would for us. For my family, it would be. Yeah. So, and I'm just saying, you can all think about, there's some flexibility in how you look at school, but for me, when I'm doing Bible with my kids in the morning and teaching them how, the Word of God and teaching them how to sing, that's school to me. That's part of my contact hours. There's lots of things in life and lots of things in the daily training that are part of their education, right? And so it's not just textbook for us. There's a lot that goes into contact hours. So
on the Colorado website, for the Colorado State website for their education goals for 2020, they have a new set that's rolling out. They have like 10 different subjects that kindergartners want to work on. How many of those do you actually have?
we're going to talk about subject requirements in a minute, okay? So contact hours, 4 hours a day, just averaging. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of if you get 30 minutes done one day and you end up doing school all day, the next day. So as long as you get the average of 4 hours in 172 days. Does that make sense to folks? Mm-hmm. Okay. How much may be delegated? Because this is always the question. The law says that the program is provided by a parent. Well, we kind of stick with HSLDA, it's Homeschool Legal Defense. Their rule of thumb is, at least 50% sort of the core academic instruction should be done by the parent. Okay, so if you're mostly, if you're doing at least half of it, then you're probably can make the argument that you are providing the program. If you're farming out 90% of it to tutor down the street, probably a little hard to make the argument that you as the parent are providing the program. Okay, so that's sort of their rule of thumb. It's a little bit of a gray area. Most people delegate some component of the education process. We recommend not more than 50%. The school year. The law does not specify the beginning or end of the school year. So lots of kids are going to be starting school in the next week or so. As a homeschool parent, you're not required to start school whenever they are. Your school year can start and end when you determine. It doesn't say in the law when it must start by.
So do we have to submit our exemptions
Uh, you do not, and I'm going to talk about notification in a second. But no, there's not in the law, and I'm talking about specific. I'm not actually saying like as a practical matter, it's probably a good idea to send your notice in sooner than later, just especially like if you're withdrawing your children from public school and then they're not there for the first month of school and you said, well, I'm going to homeschool, I just haven't filed my notice. Probably good when you withdraw them just to file your notice so that there's good communication. It's just that it's not required by law and you're not doing anything illegal if you haven't filed it by a certain date, okay? Okay, so that was contact hours. So that's one of the 4 things, okay? Down. Pretty easy. 172 days, 4 hours per day. That's not a lot of school, okay? Subjects and curriculum. So the law requires that your program needs to include reading, writing, speaking, mathematics, history, civics, literature, science, and regular courses of instruction in the U.S. Constitution. And obviously you don't have to cover these subjects every year. This is within the life cycle of your program, right? So this is just kind of the life of the home-based education program. You're required to teach these subjects. You're probably not going to teach, you might not teach U.S. Constitution to your 6-year-old, although that would be cool if you did that. There's lots of good, smart 6-year-olds that would enjoy learning about the Constitution, but you don't have to, okay? But those need to be included in the program. So those are really just the basic subjects there. And obviously, a comment about the breadth of education. So you're not limited to these subjects in terms of what's counted as contact hours. So it's not like anything that's, it's not like only these subjects count as your contact hours. They actually forgot some subjects that are pretty important to me in this list, like they forgot, Bible on that list somehow. It didn't make it into the law. But that's definitely part of our program, and that's definitely part of our contact hours, right? So you can add things in that you feel are important, and you should, okay? Trips to the zoo, yes.
So would that count under history?
I mean, it doesn't need to count under history. I mean, certainly it would, but what I'm saying is, it's not like you have to think about it like, I can't count it as a contact hour unless it fits into one of these subjects. You can add things that you want to you. This is just the minimum level. This is the minimum subjects that you have to teach. You can add more subjects to that. Yes? I'm going to get to that in the next one. Okay, so those are the subjects. And obviously, subjects are going to span the grades. So think big. Again, we want to think sort of out of the box in terms of subjects in our schooling and realize that there's lots of real-life experiences that you want your children to have that really are school. If they're building an IKEA cabinet that takes like 5 hours to put together, with you, that's a very educational experience. That could be part of your contact hours to me and my family. Okay? Yes.
What about like free play? I know that's like included in being accredited in preschool, and I know they offer some free play in kindergarten.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say a level of that, PE or whatever. Now, if you just say, hey, my kids do free play, 4 hours a day, and that's their contact hours, and we never do any. I mean, you are required to have the other subjects in there somewhere. So as long as that's not all of it, but I would say, yeah, some of that free play is good.
Have you personally had anybody like come at you and say, history? What exactly are you doing history-wise?
No, I have not, and we're going to talk about that question because you don't have to get approval on your curriculum. And the only time, there's one case in which you would, and that's if basically the superintendent of the school has probable cause that you are not following the home-based education program. So maybe like a really obnoxious neighbor hates homeschooling, and made up a story and called, and they have to have probable cause though. It can't be like an anonymous tip. They need to have evidence. Otherwise, they can't just call you up and say, hey, we just wanted to check up on your homeschool curriculum this year. That they're not allowed to do that by law, no. In that case, you would be calling like HSLDA, or if you were a member of HSLDA, and saying, hey, that's where membership with Homeschool Legal Defense Association is helpful, because they give you sort of that legal backing, and they can send them a letter or call the person back for you and say, hey, this member family isn't required to do this by law, and you need to back off. Okay? Yes?
Will you cover or provide any guidance as to where to get materials for textbooks?
So in one of the next sections, Sherry McMinn, who's our instructor for later, will talk about different curriculum and where to get that. But honestly, you can get it online. There's lots of stuff all over online. But our annual homeschool conference, honestly, is a really, really great place to explore curriculum, because a lot of the major Christian curriculum providers are there in our exhibit hall, and they bring their product, and you can talk to the people that are the experts about that curriculum at that event. So that's in June. That's a great place. If you don't know much about homeschool curriculum, and specifically Christian homeschool curriculum, come to the conference, because there's a lot out there, and they can guide you through that. So, okay, so we talked about contact hours. We've talked about subjects. Now we're on the third of four things. Okay, anybody too overwhelmed yet? It's not too bad. Okay, so notification. This is the first thing you need to do when you're starting your home-based education program. You do need to notify a school district. The law requires that. And it's the first thing you do. You do it 14 days before you start your program. And some people, are worried about, like, oh, well, it's October and I haven't filed my notice. Like I said earlier, there's not a specific requirement in the law of a certain date by which you have to file that. The requirement is that it's 14 days before you start the program, as I just said. And when you have to file the notice, it's when your child, so as the compulsory school attendance law applies to children that are 6 by August 1st and are under the age of 17. Okay? So you need to file your notice of intent if you have a child that is 6 by August 1st and you're planning to go this legal direction, 6 by August 1st. Now, the homeschool law actually says that once a child turns, even though basically compulsory school attendance applies to kids up through 16, the homeschool law says that the program and notification doesn't have to continue after the child is 16. So basically, once your child turns 16, you no longer have to notify or continue the program. Okay? Did I get that right, Carolyn? So Carolyn Martin in the back here, she's our Czech's homeschool legislative liaison. Wave your hand, Carolyn. And she's the one that's down at the Capitol at different times throughout the year organizing, but especially during the legislative session, keeping an eye on your family's freedom. So if you care about that, get a chance to chat with Carolyn. Yes?
And then that still applies even though the law has changed and now kindergarten is considered mandatory.
Well, there's been no change to compulsory school attendance law. I think they're making it available. They're not making it mandatory. Right, correct. Yeah. And the homeschool law, I was going to say, I skipped saying this earlier. I talked about how the private school law came to be. It was actually in 1988 that our homeschool law, which is basically what we have today, was passed in the late 80s. So that's when Colorado officially got a homeschool kind of law officially. So it's just celebrated its 30th year anniversary last year. But the private school umbrella option was sort of functioning even before the homeschool law came to be. Yes? It's pretty much stayed the same. There's been a few small tweaks to it in the last 30 years, but it hasn't changed in the last 15 years, something like that. So sometimes where the changes come is in other areas that are in other parts of the law that the homeschool law references, specifically like immunization requirements. We're going to talk about that in the records. But the homeschool law references another section of the CRS that talks about school entrance immunization requirements. And we have seen some attempts and some, to change those laws, but not directly to the CRS itself. Okay? Yeah.
Let me go along with her question. So if you do plan on doing kindergarten, do you recommend notifying the school?
I don't recommend it.
Okay, so don't do it until.
No. No, I recommend as much privacy as possible. Okay, so. Yeah, yep. When you're required by law to do it, then do it.
Still going off of that
Yeah.
thread. So like my son, his birthday is August 4th. So he's like right on that cutoff. So would it be like he basically turns 7 and then I would notify him?
He does. You don't have to notify because he's not 6.
Right, but when he is 6 on August 1st.
No, it's the next year.
I know, but I'm just saying when he gets to that point, so he's like 6 August 1st and then 3 days later he turns 7. It would be like first grade.
Correct.
Be doing, right?
So,
I don't have to do anything with like the second kindergarten.
well, okay, he's 5 right now, right?
Yeah, he just turned 5 like a week ago.
Okay, so you won't need to you don't need to file a notice or start the program even for like 2 years. And the program actually, I was just going to cover this, but even though you need to file the notice when if your child is 6 by August 1st, the homeschool law doesn't require you to start the program until the child turns 7. So you do need to file. Some people think that, you don't have to file a notice until they're 7. Actually, you do have to file it when they're 6 by August 1st. You just don't have to start the program until they're 7. Is that okay?
Can I annoy you?
Yeah, no, it's great.
So my youngest son is 3 and a half. His birthday's not till December 15th. So I will be starting a little bit of schooling with him. So when he turns 6 December, so he would be turning 7 at the end of December. How would that work for him? Would I just wait until I would just apply like once he turns
Well, you'll need to file a notice when he's 6 by August 1st, okay? But you don't have to start the program until he turns 7. So now there was a question actually, the law isn't super clear about, well, when he turns 7, does that mean like you start the next year or do you start the day he turns 7? The law isn't super clear about that. What's your opinion, Carolyn? Right.
You're going to be doing that, so
Right.
it's really kind of a moot point. But if they're 7, like in the fall, you're probably saying, yeah, we started a program. Okay,
Okay. All right. So notification. So this applies to children that are 6 by August 1st, and you don't have to continue it after the child turns 16. Okay, and you do need to file it annually and 14 days before you start the program. So we're going to talk about attendance in a minute. So basically the idea is 14 days before you start tracking attendance, right? Technically is how you're supposed to do it. Now I've never heard of an instance where there's a case where they're like, okay, you filed your notice on September 1st and I see that you tracked your first school day on September 7th. You know what I mean? That's not 2 weeks, that's 1 week. I've never heard of a case like that, but technically that's like it's supposed to be 2 weeks before. So that's the time frame.
So if you start your child earlier on homeschool and they're pretty advanced, how do you know when to do the 3rd grade mandatory testing?
Well, the law, we're going to get to testing in just a minute. Okay, remind me of that question when we get there. Okay, so notifications has to be done every year. Every year that you operate the home-based education program, you can file it with any school district in Colorado. It doesn't have to be your school district. It can be any school district in Colorado that you file it with. And what you need to include on the notice of intent is very limited information. The name of the child, The age of the child, not their date of birth, just their age, place of residence, and number of hours of attendance, which is going to be the 172 days. That's obviously a projection because it's filed at the beginning of the year before you've done it. So, yes.
Well, so we have our child enrolled currently in a preschool.
Okay.
If we were to withdraw him, would we then have to notify?
Not if he's not 6.
Okay.
You don't have to do anything.
Okay, so just because.
Compulsory school attendance law doesn't apply, so you're not required to do anything school related to your children until they're 6 by August 1st.
If we have to withdraw, we don't have to answer anything.
No, nope, nothing. You're just doing that of your own decision, and you can do whatever you want. You can pull them in, put them out, whatever. Yep. Uh-huh. No, so you don't do any notification if you enroll with check, because you're interacting directly with us as a private school, not interacting with the school district. Okay, so it's more private that way. Okay, and we'll cover that, yes,
Okay, so then I didn't know about the independent school, so I went ahead and in July and I sent a notice in Jeffco, and I just this last week joined that. So I need to send a letter in from them.
it's best if you do. It's best sort of as a practical matter if you just say, hey, we've enrolled them in a private school and have discontinued the home-based education program. Okay? Was there another question? Okay. Yes.
Not specific to this, but so when you were talking about the hours, so my son he's a traveling athlete. So do those hours count toward your hours for PE and stuff?
Well, I would say some of them would, but I mean, I'm sure he's traveling a lot, so you still have to get the other subjects included in the program at some point. So, probably a little bit of a gray area. There's nowhere in the law does it say you are limited to, 1 hour a day for, PE or whatever. It doesn't say that. It's very general. So I can't give you specific. I would say, use your discretion and use some wisdom, but certainly some of it could be. Yes. Okay, so so I'm going to talk about it more in a second. Basically, you got 3 legal options. You got a law for doing a home-based education program, and sometimes if you call the check office for a question, and it relates to how a legal question, the first question we're going to ask is how are you homeschooling legally? Because we need to know which route you've taken to know how to answer your question. And sometimes we'll say, are you homeschooling under an NOI or a notice of intent? Because that's the first thing you do is you file your notice, right? So it's kind of, some people call it, I'm under the NOI, or then that they're referring to the homeschool law. So you got the homeschool law, you have basically private umbrella school option, where your children are a private school student technically, but you homeschool them under the umbrella of you home educate them under the umbrella of a private school who allows you to do that. Or you're a certified teacher, and you don't need to do either of those first 2 options, okay? All right, so I'll just say, too, if you're wondering about the Czech independent school, because I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that, but essentially our requirements, there's actually more flexibility for private. That's one of the cool things about private school law, is that there's less requirements actually of private schools. And that's one of the reasons why the umbrella school option has become popular in Colorado, because it's slightly less restrictive than the home-based education. And so what you'll find is that the umbrella schools can make their own policies. And some of them have more restrictions than because of their own decision, they require more testing or more whatever than the homeschool law. Some require less. I can only answer what Czech does in our policies. And while I will say that our policies are very similar to the homeschool law, there's a few specific differences, and I'll tell you what those are. But while what I'm saying doesn't directly apply to you if you enroll in a Czech independent school, it's very similar to what you would experience in the Czech independent school, okay? Okay, so you file your notice of intent. There's a sample notice of intent in your booklet. So I wouldn't necessarily use the one the online form in Aurora or the one that Douglas County has on their website. Just use ours because it has the information that you're required to give by law. Okay, so there's two kind of exceptions here. So there's no like approval process, like you submit your notice and they approve you. You submit it and you do it. There's not an approval process. You don't have to submit curriculum or anything like that, okay? You can just decide to do it and it's done. However, if your child was like in public school and was habitually truant for the previous 6 months, they actually do have the authority by law to require that you show them the curriculum that you're planning to use or show them the curriculum plan. And I think the logic is sort of like, if you did have a child just running the streets and they had a truancy officer after you, you can't just quick file a notice of intent and say, oh, I'm homeschooling. So if there's a history of truancy, they then can require a description of the curricula. Okay, a written description, I guess. It's not actually like come and bring it into us, but a written description of what you're doing. Secondly, we're going to talk about testing and submitting your tests in a minute. But on the notice, if you are planning to, you do have the option of submitting your test on a testing grade, basically, to a private school instead of to the district. So some families do this actually with the Czech independent school, that they're not enrolled in the Czech independent school. They file a notice of intent, but they send their test scores to us and we hold them for them instead of sending them to the school district. So you do have that option. It's just a little bit more private to keep your records more private than sending it to the school district. So if you do that, you have to put on your notice at the bottom the private school that you're going to file your test with. And the logic is that way they know where to find it if they needed to. Okay? Okay, so we've done contact hours, subjects, notification, and then the last thing is testing and evaluation. And the law does require that when a child reaches grades 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, that there be some sort of assessment done. And basically you have two options. You can either do a nationally standardized test, and there's a variety of nationally standardized tests, and you can find lots of information about them on our website. There's like the California Achievement Test, the Iowa Basic, Stanford, and there's others that are considered nationally standardized tests. You can pick one of those, and they have different requirements, so you have to do a little bit of research. Some of them require the parent to have like a college degree to administer it. Some of them don't. So there's some variety. You just need to find one that works for you. Or you can have your child evaluated by a qualified individual. This is basically like a third-party sign-off by a professional in lieu of giving them a standardized test. This is especially useful for families that have struggling learners or children that don't test well. And basically you find somebody who is qualified that does an evaluation. It's their own evaluation. There's no legal description of like what that evaluation entails. And basically what you're looking for from that qualified person is a statement from them that says that your child is making progress according to their academic ability. It's basically, they're going to have their own system for arriving at that conclusion. You just need for your records sort of that statement that, this qualified individual has said that your student is making progress according to their academic ability. And a qualified individual is somebody, kind of jump down here towards the end, that is a Colorado State certified teacher or an individual with a master's degree in education or a licensed psychologist or a Colorado private school teacher. Those people qualify to do professional evaluations, and we actually have a list of some, because it's a popular option here in Colorado, we have a list of some people that do that on our website. Yes?
Which subjects must be tested on or evaluated?
The law doesn't say that. So, yeah. I'm sorry.
So you said in the notice of intent, if you want to have your test scores sent to a private school, do you just make that note the years that they would have the testing, or would it have to?
Yeah, I think you just need to do it on that because you're not going to send it anywhere else. So yeah, just the years that you have the testing. Uh-huh.
Is there more government oversight if your child does have a learning disability?
No.
No?
Okay? Yes, huh?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Will you touch base on your, like, under you guys, because there's different,
Yes, I will.
like, okay.
I'm gonna go over that real quickly in a minute here. So you got nationally standardized tests or professional evaluation. You take a copy of those test results and you submit them to the school district where you filed your notice, or to the private school that you noted at the bottom of your notice of intent. Okay, and that testing. Again, you find tests on our website. The results of the standardized test need to be above the 13th percentile, so super low. I wouldn't recommend sending I think the procedure is if you send in a test that's below the 13th percentile, they're supposed to, say, oh, that's a problem, and then you have the option of actually having your child retested. If your child fails that, they actually do have the option of pulling you back into public school. So what I would recommend is you just not send in that test either. Usually there's something else going on, a struggling learner situation or whatever. Either have them retested before you send it, or take them into and have them have an evaluation by, a qualified individual. Yep.
Well, she asked a question about the subject. So if you're doing an Iowa or Stanford, it's a battery test on each of those subjects.
Yeah.
It's math and science.
But on the evaluation, she was saying, does the evaluator have to cover all of those? It doesn't say that in the law. So, and there's no requirement about the evaluation results have to include this. So, the law is not that specific.
What are the chances that you may not have fully covered the subject that would be on that standardized test? Like, is it going to give you direction on the year? Like, how can you get direction on what you should make sure you're
I mean, if you're using any kind of, packaged curriculum, you're going to be fine. If you're totally piecing it together by yourself and you're like, wow, I just forgot math until they were 10, that could happen. That would be a problem. But normally, the basic stuff you're gonna know about. There's also scope and sequence documents out there that you can use to just, if you are piecing it together, that can be helpful to make sure that because a lot of people do like the eclectic approach. They like to use, math UC for math and apologia for science or whatever. So you might not be using just a combined.
Well, I guess my biggest question is because since they don't actually have to start school till they're 7, and you can kind of just piecemeal whatever you want to before that.
So the testing doesn't happen until the 3rd grade.
Yeah, but when do you know they're in 3rd grade?
So that's a good question. That's a good question. So I think the assumption is, and Carolyn, you can jump in and provide. I think the assumption is that that kids progress through the grades. That they're 1st grade at 6 and they're 2nd grade at 7 and so on and so forth. But we all know that no, that's not always how it happens. And so normally, generally, it's about that, when they're in 3rd grade, and so that's when you test them. The law doesn't specifically correlate the grade to a year. And so, it's not real precise in that way, which is one of the reasons why in the Czech Independent School, we actually just we have an age calculation. We calculate the grade by age. And you can modify from that, you can hold them back and there's flexibility. But we say, here's sort of your calculated grade, by your age. And then we say that's, the testing is going to start when you would be 3rd grade by the appropriate age.
And do you have like a resource to kind of check your kids periodically to see what kind of grades they're falling in on where they're at if you're not using standardized curriculum?
That's the most common way of doing it. It's just an assessment. It's a standardized test. Then you can kind of, It doesn't. It doesn't say. I mean, you have to. There's other things that talk about the age of the child, but the law doesn't correlate a grade to an age. So, yeah. I mean, the law says when a child reaches this grade. It's not actually super clear about that. I think the common practices and our recommendation is at the end of that grade, because that's the normal time when you test is at the end of it. But the law actually says like when a child reaches the grades of, so it's a little unclear. That's what people commonly do is at the end of 3rd grade, at the end of 5th grade. Yeah,
So it's up to you as the teacher to submit the test
to
for the standardized test.
so as the parent, you're required to make sure that they are evaluated. Some of the tests require the administrator of the test to have a degree. So if you have a degree, you'd find a test and you wanted to administer it, then you would find a test that doesn't require that. I don't think the California Achievement Test has any requirements on that. So you just need to make sure that it's done. You don't personally have to administer it. You need to make sure it's done by somebody and make sure it's submitted.
So if you personally did it yourself, administered it, what would stop you from doing it 10 times to get over the 13%?
Nothing. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I would retest them if they, so. Correct. Any well, for the qualified individual, it says it has to be a master's degree, but it also can be, it can be a general degree, but it can be a certified teacher. So, okay, is everyone clear on that? Testing and evaluation? Yeah, one more question.
If they have a master's degree in education, do they have to have a current teaching certificate too?
No, it's just one.
Retired teacher?
Well, no, it's one of these people. It's one of these qualifications.
I'm saying if they're a retired teacher that has a master's degree in education.
No, because it's an individual that has a master's degree in education. It doesn't matter how old they are. So, yep. Yes,
I just wanted to say, I feel like parents get test anxiety, and I homeschooled 5 kids, and I had a really good math, talented kid in math, and not so talented with reading and writing. And I had a talented kid with reading and writing who struggled with math, and not once did we get anywhere near the 13th percentile. So I just want to tell you that just by the fact that you're worried about these tests, try not to worry. And then number 2, because you're a little bit worried, you're going to do such a good job.
Hey, I think.
Anxious for nothing, please be anxious for not this. But the 13th percentile, I doubt. Just by hearing your questions and how dedicated you are and how much you care, you're not going to be anywhere near it.
Yeah, thank you. Probably that was if you remember nothing else, that was a really great thing to remember. Lots of people get really stressed out about these things, and it's, from someone that's homeschooled 5 kids, okay? All right, thank you very much for adding that. Appreciate that. Okay, any other questions on this? And again, you can call our office, and we'll help you if you have any questions about these things. So, okay, the last thing, records kept at home. You do need to keep records at home as required by law. And we don't really, the law doesn't really say how long you have to keep them, so we just say keep them indefinitely, kind of. Probably the biggest thing, as a practical matter, honestly, is records through high school. Specifically, if your child is going to be going into college or whatever, you want to have good records and try to create a good transcript for them. It's kind of a bummer sometimes when we get somebody that didn't keep good records, and then unfortunately the mom passed away, and then the child's trying to get into college and they can't find any records, and they're trying to. So that would be, as a practical matter, that's not a legal thing. As a practical matter, if depending on what you plan to do, keep good records through high school and try to maintain create a transcript as you go along. But what we're required to do by law is attendance records. So this is basically you're just keeping track of those 172 days and the hours. Okay, so you just mark it on a calendar, the back of a napkin, on a spreadsheet, whatever you want to do. Some record of those 172 days and the hours per day that you did, so that they would average out 4 hours for 172 days.
But it doesn't have to be specific to the subject in high school?
Nope, it's just a total number of hours, total number of contact hours.
So you could cruise through English, 10th grade English in, in a
You could. It's just that you do need to have, you have to have, 688 contact hours for the year within 172 days. So you have to have, you can't just cruise through it and be done with school. You do have to have 172 days, averaging 4 hours a day each school year.
But there's no particular amount of hours for each subject?
No. Nope. And you don't have to keep record of, like, I did an hour of math and I did 30 minutes of science. Yes. Uh-huh.
So let's say they're in high school, but they have the ability to take college credit,
Right.
like double dip.
There are, I think lots of options for dual enrollment and stuff like that. So whatever you can maximize out of those opportunities, certainly. There's nothing that would restrict you here, So attendance data, you're just going to keep that in your folder, right? It's maybe your calendar where you mark down at 30 minutes this day, so that you can count it up, have that in your file. Test results, which is what we just talked about. You're sending a copy to the district or the private school. You're going to keep a copy in your records too. And that's good to have because, I've had, I asked actually one sort of superintendent of a publicly funded or government-funded enrichment program. She's like, yeah, sometimes they send me these tests and I don't know what to do with them, so I just shred them. And so they're actually supposed to look at them and, make sure that they're above the 13th percentile, but they might not even keep a record of it. Now, some do. Some districts are more focused on homeschooling, but you should keep a record so that if they ever said, hey, you never sent me a test, you could say, actually, I did, and here's my copy in my records. Okay, and then the last thing is immunization records. And this is where the homeschool law does point to another area of the Colorado Revised Statutes, which talks about school entrance requirements and school entrance immunization requirements. Okay, and it does require that a student either have a certified immunization record or an exemption. And there's 3 exemption options for immunizations. There's the medical exemption, which you would get from your doctor, and there's a personal belief or religious belief exemption, where the law right now just says that the child or the parent has a personal or religious belief that's opposed to immunization, and the law just requires a signed statement. So you can literally just write that on a piece of paper and put it in your file. You don't need to use the form that you can find on the CDPHE website. There is a big push. This is probably if you were on our mailing list, the last legislative session, we did fight pretty hard against a bill that sought to make the whole exemption process quite a bit harder. And they're really focusing, in fact, the governor just had an executive order in June, and they are pushing to centralize the data specifically for exemptions, immunization exemption information. And so they're trying to track that data. They don't really like the fact that you can just say, I don't want to do this, and put it in your folder. They want to know where every single person is that hasn't been immunized. That's sort of the goal. And that's a different topic. We are not opposed, Czech isn't opposed to immunizations. We are opposed to intrusions into parental rights, into family freedom, and to privacy. And so on the basis of sort of personal privacy and parental rights and personal freedoms, we do oppose sort of regulations that would seek to centralize that and control that process. So. Yes, correct. No, you don't send it in to anybody. Exactly. Nope. The only thing that you have to send in is that test. Okay. Okay. You don't send in attendance records, and you don't send in immunization records. Okay.
So if you want to enroll in an enrichment program and they want an immunization record, can you send that exemption?
Yeah, you can give them just a signed statement, and if they say no, we want you to use the CDPHE form. One of the bad things about the form, and specifically control, we don't want them controlling and requiring the use of a certain form, because what we've seen, and this happened, that when they do say you have to use this form, and they've gotten close to it a couple times, and they add language to the form, that basically some of that language in the past was basically I acknowledge as a parent that by not immunizing my children, I am putting my children and others at risk. And and they want you to sign that, and that's compelled speech basically. And by signing that, those kinds of documents have been used in other states to prove neglect and abuse. So you don't want to sign that kind of language. So that's why we were really concerned about the language that they would put on a form and their control of the form itself. So just a signed statement. The law doesn't require you to use their form at this time. So, all right. Okay, so as I said before, you don't have to send any of the other information in unless the only time you would need to send in the attendance data or the other records would be within 14 days of written notice if a superintendent of a school district has probable cause to believe that the program is not in compliance with the guidelines of the law. So they would need to have some probable cause, something substantial, not just, hey, I'm just checking up on you. I want to make sure you're doing your thing properly. Okay? That's home-based education law. Okay? There's nothing to talk about on the Colorado teaching exemption because there's no requirements there. 2 questions, yep?
So, I'm just wanting to make it real clear. The only interaction that we have to have with the school district is the letter of intent and submitting the records. I mean, not the records.
The test. Correct. Yep, just those 2 things. And there was a question here? No? Okay. Yes,
This is jumping back, but do you know how we're talking about, like, the 4 hours a day? That you have, like, okay, so, like, let's say that we send our daughter who's in, like, 1st grade to go watch Daddy change the oil. Would that count?
I would, auto repair class, I mean, So I would think big about these are good practical life skills, right? When you're teaching your children how to do, mechanical things, you got to learn those things to function, in life. And some of that's going to be more helpful to them than, trigonometry, I can't even say it, obviously it's more helpful. So it just depends, but definitely look to maximize on those sort of hands-on educational experiences, so.
One thing I just wanted to make a statement is that the 4 hours is average, so you could do 6 hours.
Correct.
3 hours.
Lots of flexibility. Lots of flexibility. You could do 15 minutes. When the kids are really little, I'm serious about that. You don't want to do a lot of sitting down school. So when a boy is 6, 15 minutes of reading, is good, So 15 minutes, do something else, 4 hours in a day of sitting and doing something, not good. Yes,
Okay, my kids were educated through home education. They were like pushing 40. So, but what we did, Texas was a wonderful.
Yeah.
We're doing grandkids this time around, but Texas was a great place to start. And one thing, since people would look at kids back in the 80s when they're homeschooling, like we had 2 heads. So I really encouraged my son to we're going to take you to daycare. You're going to read to kids.
yeah.
And so he was like the Pied Piper. He walked outside.
That's awesome.
Kids would say, "There's Nathan." And
Yeah.
they would follow him because they knew him as a community service
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Use that. So it was really, user friendly.
Yeah.
People would say, "Oh my goodness, he likes to read."
Yeah.
Kids in a daycare.
Yeah, and look for opportunities to get your kids out and to serve other people, get them out in the community. Growing up, my parents frequently took our family to a nursing home. And since we were a musical family, we would do a musical program once a month. And, that's music, that's great social skills. Those are really definitely count that as school. Yes.
So, we own a construction company.
Okay.
So one of my homeschool friends was telling me, so you could actually use, for my son in high school, he could go with his dad to a job, put him on a project. We could consider these hours as a business entrepreneurship.
Oh, absolutely. Can you imagine? Working really you got to measure stuff, you got to calculate, you've got to interact with homeowners. Can you imagine how helpful of an educational experience that is?
But how do they gauge how many hours, if you're putting this on a transcript for college, right? How do they gauge how many hours you would have to spend working that
Okay, I can't answer I'm not good at answering putting together a transcript question. We do have a high school and beyond seminar, and you can actually and that's talked about. We have an instructor from HSLDA that covers that. You can actually register for that. We have a recording of that. I don't know, Sherry, if you'll be talking about transcripts some. Sherry will be doing our next nuts and bolts presentations, and she may be able to answer that. But if you're looking for a specific, how do I put together a transcript, that's kind of a different question. It's a great question. Come to the High School and Beyond seminar, ask Sherry, or call HSLDA, and talk to one of their high school consultants about that process. But as far as contact hours for the homeschool law, that's an awesome educational experience, in my opinion. So I would count that as contact hours. Okay? All right. So I know I'm out of time here, but I've tried to be as thorough as I could with answering questions, so hopefully we've made this clear. So I just want to touch briefly on the check independent school, which is a different option, okay? It's a different CRS. There's a law that governs private schools, and it's a little less restrictive than the homeschool law. Like I said, that's one of the benefits. And that's why it's, continued to be around and people like it. So within that, the umbrella schools have some flexibility to make their own policies. The main laws are that they have, it's the same number of attendance days, 172 days. It's just that the private school law doesn't refer to hours. And so there isn't an hour per day requirement. There's not an average of so many hours. And so, for example, when you turn your attendance records into us as a check independent school, we just want to see number of days. We don't need you to track the hours because the law doesn't require it. Okay, if you're going this route, you don't interact with the public school directly at all. You don't file a notice of intent because that's a requirement of a different law. You don't send in a test to them because that's a requirement of a different law. Okay? So there's no interaction with the public school system in terms of requirement by law. The subjects that are required of private schools are almost identical to the homeschool law. The only addition is the honor. They've added the subject of the honor and use of flag, which is cool. It's not a big deal. So we have a little booklet that you can use. And then I think they're more specific that the courses in the U.S. Constitution need to start at the 7th grade in the private school law. And this is a big one right here. Actually, there's no testing required under private school law. Private schools aren't required by law to do any kind of testing. So there's quite a bit of flexibility there. Now, the check independent school, we have decided as a policy to align our rules and what we require basically with the homeschool law. So we do require tests. And the basic logic is that if there was ever, somebody looking into what are you doing with this check independent school that has thousands of families enrolled in it, that we could always point to our policies and say this is pretty much the same as what's in the homeschool law, and that there wouldn't be any concern there. But what we do have a little bit of more flexibility. We do have a few tests that we accept that aren't technically standardized tests, but we think that they're good tests, and so we allow those when they wouldn't normally qualify under the home-based education program. We also have, on the home-based education program, you have the professional evaluation, the standardized tests. We've added a third option, which is called the parent assessment, and this is something that's proprietary to us, and that is basically a journal-style record that the parent keeps of the progress of their child. And so we're kind of saying, well, we kind of believe that the parents are the professionals. And so if they document it for us in a journal-style approach, we would accept that instead of either of the other two things. And so you can do that as well. That's a very popular option. Lots of parents like that. Again, you get a little bit more freedom, flexibility than you would under the homeschool law. So some parents, what they do is at the beginning of a testing year, they'll get a copy of the parent evaluation, and they'll keep notes and records of what they've done and how their students has progressed through the year. And at the end of the year, they're done basically. They just submit that parent assessment, and you don't do a standardized test, don't need to go into a professional evaluator. Okay, so those are sort of the benefits. Basically, little more privacy, a little more flexibility, all working with someone who is a pro homeschooling entity that's going to make sure that you guys are successful. So also we have, if you're enrolled in a Czech independent school, we've bundled in a lot of other benefits. So you basically get free admission to any of our seminars like you're at today, or a high school and beyond seminar. You also get into our annual conference for free in June if you're enrolled in a Czech independent school. So there's a bunch of, we have like a document library that has grade cards and scheduling templates, and there's a student ID generator that you can do a printable student ID. There's places where you can get discounts, like at the Denver, Science Museum. They actually have a pretty good discount on their membership if you have a teacher ID. So you could print that off, and anyway. You can, and we do allow for out-of-state and even international families to enroll in a Czech independent school. What we can't say is that it necessarily fulfills the legal requirement in that particular state or country. So you would have to see what the law is in your new state. In some countries internationally, homeschooling, where it's not developed, it's vague, right? And that's why we've made this kind of available to international families, because sometimes it helps them in their country to say, well, my child is enrolled in a United States-based private school. And that helps them to have some credibility in their homeschool journey, even though it doesn't officially necessarily fulfill the requirement. So,
Is there a need, if we're a member of Czech, is there a need to be a member of HSLDA too, or does that kind of...
Yes, they're two completely different things. So Czech doesn't actually have membership as an organization. We have a school, and you can enroll students in the school.
And you pay?
It is. It's $85 for the family, however many kids you have, if you enroll by August 31st. And then it's like $95 after that. For the year. For the year. 85 for the year, yeah. So, and then you can come, do any of the other stuff too. So HSLDA, we do recommend membership with them. That's a completely different thing. Their primary focus, obviously, is kind of legal insurance in a way. If you ever had a situation with related to homeschooling, they would be there to support you and to, stand up for you. So they also do, if you're a member of them, they have a lot of other resources and benefits too. So they have like high school consultants and whatever somebody was asking about transcripts. You could talk, if you were a member, you could talk to their high school consultant and find out about how to create a transcript. Okay, so that's a separate thing. I do recommend that. I think their annual membership is like $120 or something like that. Okay. So Czech independent school, and then we do recommend HSLDA, and then Heritage Defense is one other organization that you can be a member with, and they're more focused on sort of child protective services, situations, and protection. And they're another great sort of legal defense association that you can join that protects parental rights and family freedoms, and they'll get involved if, there's some weird stuff that happens out there. So, okay, any other questions on that? Yes?
So if you decide to go through Czech, you still got to send in your letter of intent?
No, because you don't do that. You don't interact at all then. And so if you had your child enrolled in public school and you withdrew them, you would just say, I'm enrolling my child in a private school. So, and I think part of our enrollment process is we do provide you with a letter that you can, give to them and say, here's documentation that shows that I enrolled in a private school, but you don't actually submit a notice of intent. Because that's what if you file a notice of intent, you're saying, I'm starting a home-based education program under this law. So,
With either exception 1 or exception 2, is the 172 hours limited to a grade? Or, let's say, for example, I have 9-year-old twins, and if one likes to study a lot and I find that they're ready to advance to 5th grade sooner than the other one, can they within that year, or is it limited to 1 grade per year?
well, I mean, Yeah, I mean, it's 172 hours per school year, not per grade. So I think you're saying, like, what if my child could do 2 grades in 1 year? Yeah, it doesn't say 172 hours per grade. Yes. Uh-huh. All right.
Just one comment about child protection
Uh-huh.
law. So the kids out there running around, I'm just making this as a
Yeah.
statement because I've been connected with the Department of Human Services and child protection
Okay.
particularly. I mean, our first one was pretty, okay, so the comment I want to make is the kids are running outside, they're wearing the same clothes every day. Some of your neighbor calls them and says, we have these kids who are next door and they're not dressed right and we don't know what's going on. If you get a call, you just be as just kind as possible. They're required to check on anything that comes in, anonymously
Yeah.
or So once they do call, you just go ahead and you comply with them, and then they check it further, and usually they just drop off.
Uh-huh.
If you make a big deal out of it with child protection,
Yeah.
they tend
Kind of
that
dig
tends
in,
to
yeah.
go on even more.
Yeah. Oh, there's a reaction. There must be a problem here.
Yeah. So they just, your kid might go to church and make a comment
Yeah.
to somebody in the church, and then they make a call.
Yeah.
And then when
Yeah.
they're required to check on every call that they so
Yeah.
just don't make a big deal.
Yeah.
And just say, okay, this is what happened. We homeschool.
Yeah.
And usually just drops
Yeah.
off. Not a problem.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I appreciate you sharing that. The one thing that I would add is that there's a certain line, okay? If they come to your door and want to come in your house, I would strongly recommend that you not let them in your house. So, well, take the approach of not being like antagonistic or whatever. There's a line, and if they come to your door, they can't come into your house without a warrant. I mean, you shouldn't let them in. And what happens sometimes when people would take this kind of line of reasoning too far, and they're like, well, if I just sat down in the living room with them and showed them around my house and showed them how clean my kitchen was, that's bad, because it often then they get new information then that they can build a case on that they didn't have before, and they can take stuff that's not a problem and make a case out of it. So Heritage Defense, HSLDA would definitely say, if somebody comes to your door, don't let them in. Be kind and courteous. Ask them for their identification and for a warrant, but don't let them into your house just to sort of appease them. Okay? And the other thing I would add too is, like, in the neighborhoods, because we live in a neighborhood, like, interact with the neighbors. And we have great relationships with some of our neighbors in particular. And honestly, I mean, sometimes my kids are wearing the same thing the next day. But they're dressed nicely and their hair is done and they know how to be polite, and our neighbors love them. So interact with them. There's often a lot of other stuff that goes into these issues. Like if your kids never talk to the neighbors that live 20 feet away, that's a little weird. And that's, so you want to have good social skills and interact and be kind and courteous. And usually then it's some other, lack of good judgment that sort of precipitates other problems, okay? All right, that's it. You guys are awesome. If there's any other questions, call, on the legal side of stuff, call the office. Josh, are we doing lunch now? Another session, okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Sherry McMinn, and appreciate you guys, and look forward to seeing you around in the future.